just climbed into this stand. Oh my gosh, dude. Welcome back to TriStar Outdoors, everybody. My name's Elisha. I want to welcome you to our very first deer hunting episode here on the channel. Super excited to get to share this story with you today. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I had very high hopes going into this season, and those quickly dissipated, and I was not 100% confident that Jake or I, either one, would get to make a deer hunting video for you guys this year. I spent the early part of this season getting absolutely beaten up by a specific buck that I was hunting around home. And so when that wasn't working out, when I got almost halfway through the season and realized that that deer might not happen, I decided it's time to make a different move. Now this specific area, it's not a large property, but it connects to a very large patch of cover. So it works like a funnel. The deer tend to funnel back and forth on top of this ridge, but ridge is an understatement. It's borderline a mountain. The terrain makes it very difficult to hunt. It's a very steep hill that you have to climb to get to any kind of cover, and especially to any kind of tree that you can climb. And so for me to go and try to bow hunt this was an extremely difficult thing to do. Before we get into all of that, before we get into the terrain, before we get into the actual hunt, I want to back up to the summer. This was an area, like I say, that I had seen deer before, so I knew that they had previously been there, but I didn't know to what extent. I hadn't ever ran any cameras. I hadn't ever really scouted this area before, so I wanted to get in there and I wanted to scout. I wanted to see what kind of deer were actually there. What caliber of deer am I actually dealing with? And I really did. Once we got up this mountain, I had high hopes. We saw a lot of sign, we saw a lot of trails. So I picked the area that I felt like we were most likely to see deer. We laid out the corn, we laid out the camera, and we waited. A few days go by with nothing really happening. Then my SpyPoint app goes off and I get a few pictures starting to roll in. The field that we have to walk through to get up this ridge is actually a cow pasture. And I guess I underestimated how far up a mountain a cow would climb for cherry scented corn. But the answer is they'll climb a long way, because when my phone started dinging with these pictures, I realized very quickly that it was all cattle. And so the cows in this pasture field had found their way up that ridge and found my pile of cherry scented corn, and they demolished it in a day, in an afternoon is all it took them. So as the days rolled on, the cows kind of lost interest because they cleaned up most of the corn, and a few pictures of does and young bucks started to roll in. So I wasn't completely out of hope that maybe I'm actually in a decent area, but it was nothing of interest yet. That was until mid-September. I was sitting at work one day and I get a notification on my phone from my SpyPoint camera. I nearly fell out of my chair when I saw what was on that camera. This giant 8-point pops up like a ghost, out of nowhere and gone before you know it. Got one picture of him, and it's then that I realized I'm dealing with a very large deer on this property. The first thing I noticed was how big his neck was in September, and so I realized I'm dealing with not only a large deer antler-wise, but I'm dealing with an older buck, and probably the oldest buck that I've ever gotten the opportunity to try to hunt. And so fast forward a little bit now to bow season. Most of my early season efforts was going into one specific buck closer to home. And so I hadn't really paid much attention to that other property. It wasn't until mid-October that the Big 8 showed back up. And he showed up in this bachelor group. So that's when I really got my first good look at this deer. The only picture that I had prior to that was that dark, blurry picture that I showed you earlier. Because of that, I made up my mind that I've got to make a move and get towards this deer. And so after I'd had enough of getting beat up by this other buck, I packed up all my stuff one Sunday afternoon and headed towards this property to try to get a stand hung. All right, good, beautiful Sunday afternoon, folks. This is the day that the Lord has made. We're going to rejoice and be glad in it. It is currently October 8th, and we are making a move. The reason we are making this move today is that the number 1 buck and number 2 buck that I have gotten on camera at this place both showed up yesterday evening within 10 minutes of one another. The first buck showed up at about 5:30. And the other buck showed up at 5:39, so within about 10 minutes of one another. So we're making a very aggressive move tonight. I do not have a stand hung over here yet, so I've got my lone wolf, so I'm going to be basically hanging and hunting here, and we're going to just see what happens. I mean, it's just now about 3 o'clock. Should get there before 3:30, so that should give me a couple of hours to get up in there, get set up, get settled, and wait and just see what strolls through. And so I've only got one camera up here, so I've only got a snapshot of what's at this place, but I've seen enough evidence. There's potential I could kill a very good buck up here. I'm excited to get in here and hunt some big bucks, man. So we're gonna try to see if we can get something within range. Y'all stay tuned. We're gonna get us a tree stand hung. And so, very hopeful moving into this hunt, very defeated coming out of this hunt. I never actually got to record anything of the actual hunt because the way that afternoon went, again, I mentioned how steep the terrain is. So after I hiked up that mountain with about 30 pounds of camera gear and a tree stand on my back, I then began the search of what tree am I actually going to be able to hang in. So I stumbled around, got lost trying to find where I'd hung my camera because everything looked different than it did back in the summer. I almost got attacked by yellow jackets. That was fun. That I thought I was going to fall off the side of the mountain whenever I almost stepped on a yellow jacket nest. And so, yeah, got pretty beat up on that hunt. I eventually got my stand hung. Didn't see any deer that evening, but I now had a stand at this location, and the tree that I found was probably less than 100 yards from this bedding area that I had talked about that was up on top of the ridge. So I was in very close proximity to where these deer were bedding, and so I knew I had to be very careful and very selective for when I went back to that stand. So because it was so risky and so difficult to access this stand, I only ended up hunting it one more time, saw one deer in this thicket, and I decided that it's probably best if I hold off to hunt this stand until around pre-rut time. So on my last bow hunt at this stand, I went ahead and moved my camera and I started a mock scrape less than 30 yards away from my tree stand. And like clockwork, at the end of October, the Big 8 shows up right in front of that mock scrape. So I knew I was in the right area. At this point, I just had to be patient and wait on the right time to get in to hunt this deer. We got a little breeze blowing this evening. shoot anything that walks. As long as it's not a little buck or a fawn, I'll shoot a doe, I'll shoot a turkey, or I'll shoot a decent buck. Obviously, a coyote would thrill me to death. I'm just itching to send an arrow at something. And so we're now into muzzleloader season. The deer back home did exactly what they do best. They are continuing to beat me up real bad. So I was now just patiently awaiting for an opportunity to go back and hunt the big 8. So on the last day of bow season, I decided that if nothing happened, the weather was going to be right to go back and hunt the big 8. Even though I'd not gotten any pictures of him, I just wanted to be in the area and try something different because, again, food plots weren't working out, acorns were everywhere, deer movement was sporadic. And so I made up my mind on that Friday that Saturday, opening day of muzzleloader season, I was going to be sitting in that other stand right next to that bedding area. Okay, so that was a really fun morning. I've seen deer, I've seen squirrels, I've even seen cattle this morning. They are moving really, really good today. I came back over here on this ridge. I've hunted it just a couple of times during bow season. Got some really good pictures of some bucks over here. But they're moving really heavy right now, so I decided to try this morning for opening a muzzleloader. As the pre-rut's ramping up here, I'm going to be focusing a lot more energy into this spot because I have seen 3 bucks. I saw a big 8-point this morning. After that, a younger buck that I was able to get on camera came through in range. The 8-point never got to where I could shoot him. He walked the other way. I hear walking, but it might be cows, it might be a deer, I don't know. So I'm on edge right now, but this might not be over. I'm gonna sit down for a minute. And so I ended up having a great morning over there. Even though I didn't get to shoot, there was a ton of action on that ridge. So at this point, I knew I was in the right area at the right time. The only problem was working a full-time job. I was gonna have to wait another week to get after these deer again. The following Friday, I had a half day at work. I was gonna get to leave at lunchtime, and I was gonna take full advantage of that. I didn't have any other stand on my mind. I didn't have any other deer on my mind. Again, still no pictures of the big 8, but I felt like if he's alive, this is where I'm gonna see him. And so I'd kind of lowered my standards at this point a little bit. I decided that if I saw that first bigger 8-point again, I would seriously consider taking that deer because, again, I didn't know if the big 8 was still alive or not. And so I didn't know exactly how this hunt was going to go, but I just knew I wanted to be in that stand, and I wanted to get there as quickly as I could. So I ended up getting dressed at the truck, had all my stuff with me, threw on all my gear, and headed up the mountain. It was barely 1 or 2 in the afternoon. I mean, just after lunchtime when I ended up heading up this mountain. But again, as soon as you get your confidence up, there's always a doe waiting around the corner to ruin that confidence. And as I was walking up this mountain, creeping up towards my tree stand, there ended up being 2 does up on that mountain with me, and they blew out of there. And so, you know, you've got that voice inside of you that tells you, hunt's over, I got blown at, it's time to go to the house, not even worth climbing into the tree stand. But I told myself as I was standing on that hill getting blown at by 2 does at one time, this is a magical time of year as the pre-rut and the rut start to ramp up. Just get in the tree and hunt like it never happened. And that's exactly what I did. I started my climb up and just pretended like those does never blew at me, because I knew in my mind I really have no idea what's going to happen. And so this is where the story really gets interesting. And I appreciate you bearing with me to this point, because believe you me, exactly how you're feeling is just how I felt as I was progressing through this season, not knowing if anything was actually going to happen or not. So I climbed up the tree as slow as I could, swung my foot over into the tree stand, and got to the point where I could hang my muzzleloader up. And as I was standing there, I was about to take off my backpack full of my camera gear. I still had everything on and had just gotten into this tree stand. And as I grabbed my backpack to start to take it off, I heard footsteps over my right shoulder. What ended up happening was the big 8 walked through at just 21 yards. I hate so bad that I didn't just get that on camera. I just climbed into this stand. I just climbed into this stand. That's the biggest Tennessee buck I've ever shot. I'm gonna get with you in just a minute. I'm literally recording on my iPhone right now because that's how quick that just happened. I didn't even take my backpack off before that deer came cruising in. I was walking up this hill and 2 does busted me. They were blowing and they took off. And I'm not kidding you. As soon as I put my feet in that stand, I could hear footsteps coming from up this direction. And he came cruising in, and I just shot him at 20 yards. He dropped. I put one more round in him just because I could still see him, and he was still moving. But within a minute, he was dead. And so that's the biggest Tennessee buck I've ever shot. That's the big 8. That's the big 8. There's several 8 points that have been running around up here. Even saw a pretty good one last trip up here. But that's the big guy. That's not the one I saw last time. I'll get on my good camera here in just a minute. But I gotta go put my hands on this deer, man. My gosh, dude. Dude, this is unbelievable. Oh, dude. Thank you, old buddy. Thank you. I'm in shock and I'm in awe that this happened the way that it did. I mean, this deer came cruising through a minute after I got into the stand. I mean, I had not gotten my backpack off of my back before this deer came through. I immediately recognized which deer this was because of this point right here, and I'd had him on camera all the way back since the summer. The first picture I got of him was in velvet, so I've been watching this deer since the summer, and he's better than I ever could have thought that he was, man. I mean, I roughly measured with my phone, and we're looking at probably a 20-inch inside spread. This is second biggest deer I've ever killed, but first biggest deer I've killed in Tennessee. Again, I hate that I didn't get this part on video, but after all the adversity, every trip I've made up this mountain with that camera bag, man, I've sweated and worked my butt off to be standing here and holding this deer, and I'm so happy with him. And so just, I got nothing to say but thank you, Lord, for letting him walk in front of me. Shot him at 20 yards. There's no track job with this one. He fell right where he was and slid right down the hill. And man, this is such a good deer. I walked in and two does blew at me right up that direction. And those two does, they might have busted me, but I think this deer was coming in to investigate what those deer were doing, and man, he came cruising right through 20 yards, and I freehand shot him with my muzzle loader, and again I put that second shot in. Now that I get up on the deer, my exit wound's right here on the first shot. This deer was dead either way, but I put another one in from the angle that I was at, and it you know, because I was just hoping to hit at least another lung or maybe even heart with that second shot, but that was just educational. I don't think I had to do that, but I didn't want to take a chance on a deer like this, man. And so overall time, you know, he died in less than a minute, and so always happy when that happens. Had several cool hunts up here. Might be back, might not, might try to hunt around the house a little bit more. Got a couple bucks that we're looking at over there, that we're chasing. But if this is the last deer that I get to take here this year, if this is the last deer that I get to take all season, that's a heck of a way to do it right there, man. That's a good deer by anybody's standards, I believe. And if it's not, I'll pray for you. So it was insane how everything ended up working out on this hunt. That was undoubtedly, if you count the time that you actually are in the stand, this was without a doubt my quickest hunt to date. Now, it took me a long time to climb up the mountain, don't get me wrong, but I was in that tree stand for probably less than a minute or two before that buck came walking through at 21 yards. And so the shot that you saw was the second shot, and again, that was just because I was absolutely terrified that that buck might get back up and take off running And the reason is because I've had that happen before with a muzzleloader, so I guess I'm a little bit scarred from that. I didn't need to put that shot in that deer, but the deer was still alive, he was in range, and I had more ammunition, and that checks all of my boxes as far as I'm concerned. And so I put that other round into that deer to make sure that it was as quick and clean as possible. Anytime that we can have a deer expire in less than 2 minutes, that's what we want. I feel very, very blessed to be in a position to be able to tell this story because, again, I didn't know how this season was going to go. I didn't know at this point. It was November, and you always have those thoughts running through your head. Is it ever going to happen? Is it ever going to happen? And so for it to happen like this, again, as bummed as I am that I wasn't able to get the first shot on camera, I'm not upset at all that this hunt worked out the way that it did. It's a memory that'll live with me forever. I'm glad that I get to share as much of it as I possibly can with you guys, but absolutely insane that I was in the stand for as short as I was, and that deer, the biggest deer that I have killed in Tennessee, came walking through at 21 yards. It's a memory that I'll never forget. I absolutely love the sport of hunting. It's something, a feeling that you have to experience to understand what I'm talking about. There's no other feeling like it when it finally works out for you. And it's a closeness to God's creation that's unexplainable unless you just have been there and understand where I'm at. And so I've rambled on for the entire video trying to fill in these gaps as best as I can. So I'll just end like this and say thank you so much for watching and following along on this journey, this wild, wild ride of a deer season that we've had. We've got another video on the way soon, another story that I can't wait to tell, and then it involves this guy right back here. So I'm super, super excited for that. Can't wait to tell that story. But for now, I'll sign off by saying thank you so much for watching TriStar Outdoors, and we will see you guys in the next one.